Thank you for joining us on American Medicine Today. We continue to social distance, and I'm joined by my friend Ethan Euchre.
I'm glad to be here. Socially distance, of course, because apparently that's what we have to do for now. Who knows how long this is going to continue, but I miss seeing you, Kimberly.
I miss seeing you too. This isn't the same. The whole computer thing doesn't feel all warm and fuzzy.
No.
But we'll get into this next story.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to our next guest here. It's a sad story, but it needs to be heard.
Absolutely. On June 28, 2005, 19 U.S. service members perished in the mountains of Afghanistan, including the husband of our next guest. The mission has become one of the most well-known operations in contemporary warfare and was documented in the blockbuster film Lone Survivor. Joining us now is Char Westfall, whose new book, A Beautiful Tragedy, A Navy SEAL Widow's Permission to Grieve and a Prescription for Hope. It details her struggles with processing the loss of her husband and how she was finally able to restore her broken heart. Thank you for being here, Char.
Thank you for having me today. It's nice to see you all.
Absolutely. Now, obviously a very tough topic to discuss in general, but why don't we just start with having you tell us about your husband, what your relationship was like before he went to Afghanistan.
So we were married almost 5 years, been together for close to 10. He was a little older, I was younger. We met while I was still in college, and we were living a great life. We're living in Virginia Beach, had some great friends, had a great group around us, and a great marriage.
And what kind of guy was your husband?
Oh, he was funny, sarcastic, knew a ton about sports, loved good food, loved his city of New Orleans for the good food and good wine, and loved his country, his family, and really enjoyed his job.
Can you describe for us the mission that your husband was on? It was Operation Red Wings?
Basically, if you're familiar with the story Lone Survivor with Marcus Luttrell, four guys went out to do some surveillance, and they were compromised. And being the military that we are in the United States, they were diligent about going by the rules. And so as much as they may or may not have wanted to let them go, that was what was needed. And unfortunately, they did go back and tell the Taliban about their location. And so they were under attack by many Taliban, and that is when they were able to get communication back to the base, requesting some assistance and help. And that's when 2 helicopters full of Navy SEALs and Army took off to go give them assistance and hopefully rescue them.
How were you told about your husband's death?
I was hosting a bunch of my friends for dinner that night, and we had gone down to the garage. Another friend of mine, he was helping me look for some charcoal, and we heard car doors shut. And I turn around to see three people in uniform starting to walk towards me. And I was lucky enough to be surrounded by a bunch of friends, so I wasn't alone, thankfully. The SEAL teams hadn't experienced this kind of loss since the Vietnam War, so it was very new to them how to notify 11 different families on the same day. And actually the 3 on the ground were notified later, but all those on the helicopter. And so thankfully I wasn't alone, but yeah, they brought me up into my condo and asked all my other friends to leave. And at first told me that he was missing in action, because at that point they hadn't located the helicopter. So that's all they could tell me at that point.
What went through your mind at that point?
I knew he was gone. The day before, we had gotten word that something had happened, and there was just something in the pit of my stomach that just told me that I knew he was one of them. I didn't want to believe it, so when they first told me they were just missing in action, I remember looking at my friend and saying, "So there's a chance?" And the look in his eyes, I was like, okay.
Given the 24/7 news coverage of things, specifically with some of these battles and war and things like that, that was going to be my question. Was did the news or the media run anything that might have tipped you off ahead of the actual military?
I remember my eye catching a channel that was on and them saying that a U.S. helicopter had been shot down. And I remember just sitting there thinking, I just hurt for those families. And I just sat there and prayed right then for them. And I was like, oh, that's just going to be horrible. Not really knowing at that point that it was me. I mean, it was a couple hours later that we were told that it could be our guys. And then it wasn't until I believe the next evening that I was actually notified.
And so how did you deal with that sort of grief? I can imagine it was a mixed bag of emotions, probably anger, sadness. Just what do you do with your life at that point when everything changes?
Definitely, like you said, just up and down, mix of emotions. I'd go from angry to sad to I don't really want to believe this. This can't be my life. I was 29 years old. We were waiting to have children. He had a beautiful daughter from a first marriage prior to me. And I just remember thinking, I've lost everything. I've lost my husband. I've lost my future. I lost the thought of being a mom and having a family. And so about a year into it, I just decided that I wasn't handling it very well on my own. And so I started getting some counseling, and then eventually found happiness and have remarried, and which is then why my husband now encouraged me to write a book. 'Cause he's like, you need to express to other people and give them an inside look at what the grief process really does look like, the reality of it, and that there is hope. And though we don't always deal with it the same way, you can find a way out of what you feel is like your rock bottom.
Did you get any advice from other widows that have been through the same thing that unfortunately you were suffering through at that time?
Not at the time. There was just a couple of them. And unfortunately, I had just sold our condo and was buying a house in Virginia Beach. And then obviously, since he wasn't coming home and we had always planned to go back to Florida or be around one of our families, I was like, I can't stay here. So I lost that entire community when I moved back to Florida. I mean, I still had phone calls, but it wasn't the same. So there's now a large group of us, which I guess in some ways is good for the new ones coming in, because there's so many of us that others can rely on now. But back then, I felt like we just kind of had to figure it out on our own. Not really a lot of guidance or direction on how you're supposed to navigate it.
And what kind of advice would you personally have for other widows and widowers, especially those that were married to service members who, may have died in combat?
For one, they need to just understand that their grief is their grief. They can't compare their journey to anybody else. But I strongly believe you have to keep living. I mean, you can't let this tragedy define you. I mean, it's horrible and it's hard and it's a long road, and especially those with children are probably even different than me. I mean, I remember being jealous of those who had kids and them saying, oh my goodness, do we come around her because how does she feel? And, oh, will she be able to move on easier than us? So it's, you can't compare. But I think the best way to honor your loved one is to keep living, to remember them and to honor them, but to now live your life to the fullest.
Thank you for joining us so much. Char Westfall, whose new book, A Beautiful Tragedy, A Navy SEAL Widow's Permission to Grieve and a Prescription for Hope, details her struggles with processing the loss of her husband. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks,
Thank
Char.
you for having me.
Stay tuned. We'll have more after the break.